You bury your phone in a drawer when it breaks. You don't bury it because you love it. You bury it because looking at it hurts. Now imagine that feeling, multiplied by everything a person ever was, and you start to understand why death has always terrified and fascinated your species at the same time. But the real answer to what your ancestors did when someone died is far stranger than a simple burial. It is older than burial itself. It is older than language. And it might explain something about the way you grieve today that you've never been able to name. Start with a single fact. Death rituals are one of the oldest behaviors that separate humans from every other species on Earth. Chimpanzees mourn. Elephants linger near the bones of their dead. But no other animal builds a grave. No other animal paints a body. No other animal plans, on purpose, what happens to the dead. Somewhere around 100,000 years ago, something changed in the human mind. And archaeologists found the proof of it in a cave. At Kafsa in modern-day Israel, researchers uncovered a human skeleton deliberately placed in a pit, knees bent, with deer antlers positioned in the dead person's hands. This wasn't an accident. Antlers don't fall into a grave on their own and arrange themselves like that. Someone placed them there. Someone chose that gesture, for reasons that still aren't fully understood, but reasons that mattered enough to do it carefully. Why would a hunter-gatherer, with limited time and limited resources, spend hours digging a hole and arranging a corpse with ceremonial precision? Because something in the human brain had crossed a threshold. You had started to understand that death was permanent. And once a creature understands permanence, it needs a way to cope with it. Anthropologist Paul Pettit, who has spent decades studying Paleolithic burial practices, argues that the earliest deliberate burials weren't just about disposing of a body. They were the first evidence of symbolic thought. Your ancestors weren't simply removing a problem. They were creating meaning. The grave goods, the body position, the careful placement, all of it suggests an attempt to say something. To communicate with the dead, or about the dead, in a way that mattered to the living. This is the moment, somewhere in that cave 100,000 years ago, where grief became more than an emotion. It became a behavior. A ritual. A technology for survival. Because here's something almost no one tells you about grief. It isn't really for the dead. It's for you. Consider what happens at Sungur, a site in Russia dated to roughly 34,000 years ago. Archaeologists found 2 children buried head to head, covered in thousands of meticulously carved ivory beads. Each bead would have taken hours to make. Thousands of hours of collective labor, poured into honoring 2 young lives that were already gone. Think about that for a moment. A community, almost certainly stretched thin by the demands of an ice age, chose to spend an almost unthinkable amount of time and effort on people who could no longer benefit from any of it. Why? Because the ritual wasn't really for the children. It was for everyone left standing at the grave. It was proof, made visible, that the community still held together. That loss had a shape. That grief had somewhere to go besides spiraling forever in the chest of a parent who couldn't fix what happened. Psychologist and grief researcher Mary Frances O'Connor, who studies the neuroscience of bereavement, has found something remarkable about how the human brain processes loss. Your brain, she explains, doesn't have a single switch that says, "This person is gone." Instead, it has to slowly update an enormous internal map of the world, a map built over years that assumed this person would always be there to text back, to walk through the door, to exist in the next room. Grief, in her research, is your brain rewriting that map one update at a time. And rituals, old or new, function as the scaffolding that makes the rewriting possible. The ivory beads at Sungur weren't decoration. They were thousands of small, physical acts of acceptance. Every bead said, "This happened. This is real. We are doing something about it together." Without ritual, grief has nowhere to land. It just circles. Now think about what ancient burial practices actually looked like across different climates and cultures, because the diversity itself tells you something important. In some Neanderthal sites, like Shanidar Cave in present-day Iraq, researchers found pollen clusters near a skeleton, suggesting, though this remains debated among archaeologists, that flowers may have been placed with the body. If even partially true, it means a species often imagined as brutish and simple may have understood something profoundly human, that the dead deserved beauty, even when beauty served no survival function at all. In other regions, bodies were painted with red ochre, a mineral pigment that shows up again and again across tens of thousands of years of human history, on every inhabited continent. Red ochre wasn't easy to get. It had to be mined, ground, mixed. And yet ancient humans went out of their way to coat their dead in it. Some researchers believe the color symbolized blood, and by extension, life, an attempt to ritually restore vitality to a body that no longer had any. Others believe it was about marking transition, a visible signal that this person had crossed from one state of existence into another. Either way, the message is the same. Death needed translation. The living needed a way to make sense of the body in front of them, a way to turn raw biological fact into something survivable. This brings you to the strangest part of the story. The part that connects directly to you, sitting wherever you are right now. You have inherited every one of these instincts. You just don't recognize them anymore because they've been dressed up in modern clothing. When you visit a grave and leave flowers, you are doing exactly what someone in Shanidar Cave may have done 60,000 years ago. When you dress in black for a funeral, you are participating in a tradition of marking transition that stretches back to ochre-painted bodies in the Paleolithic. When you build a memorial page online, post a photo, write, "Rest in peace," beneath it, you are doing the same fundamental thing as the people who spent thousands of hours carving ivory beads for two dead children in an ice age. You are converting an unbearable absence into a visible, shared act. None of this is decoration. None of this is performance. It is 50,000 years of evolved psychological technology, still running quietly in the background of your modern grief. And here is the twist almost no one expects. The earliest burial rituals may not have started, primarily, as a way to honor the dead at all. Some archaeologists, including those who study early hominin behavior, suggest the earliest deliberate burials may have begun as something closer to a practical problem with an emotional solution attached. Decomposing bodies attract predators and disease. Burying them protected the group. But somewhere in that practical act, your ancestors discovered something unexpected. The burial itself helped them process the loss. The digging, the placement, the ritual gestures, all of it gave grief somewhere to go. What began as survival biology accidentally became the birth of meaning-making. This is the part of being human that almost nothing else on earth shares with you. Not just that you grieve, but that you transform grief into action, into symbol, into shape. Your brain needed a way to update its map of the world when someone disappeared from it forever, and somewhere in a cave in the Levant, 100,000 years ago, your ancestors invented one. You inherited that invention. Every flower left on a headstone. Every candle lit in a window. Every photo shared with trembling hands. All of it traces back to a single, quiet decision made by a person who looked at a body that would never move again, and decided that the absence deserved a shape. You bury your phone in a drawer when it breaks. But when you lose someone who actually mattered, you don't bury the memory. You give it a ritual. And in doing that, without ever realizing it, you are doing the oldest human thing there is.